Hello everyone, my name is Nitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. This time I'm going to be taking a look at Classic Collection, and Classic Collection offers us some pretty decent tools to upgrade and iterate some current and existing decks. And today's deck that I'm going to be upgrading and iterating is going to be the Hexeblaumon deck. So Hexeblaumon does play around with the sub-theme of attacking the opponent's inheritable sources, and we do have a couple of cards in the Classic Collection that's playing around with that sub-theme. So without further ado, onto the deck profile. Starting off with the Digitama, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Upamon still as the main Digitama because this is one of the best draw engines that we have to be working with for Hexeblaumon. So it is interacting with the fact that we want our opponent's Digimon to have no Digivolution sources, and he gives the inheritable of when we're attacking once per turn. If the opponent's Digimon has no Digivolution sources in it in play, then we get to draw 1 card. So literally for our Hexeblaumon attacking, this is basically going to be drawing us a card, which is pretty good. And then as far as the 5th Digitama of the deck goes, it could really be anything you want it to be, but I'm going to be running 1 copy of Kyaromon because it's acting very similar to Upamon, where it's going to be a really good draw engine for the deck. So what this card is doing versus Upamon is its inheritable ability states that during your turn, once per turn, when one of the opponent's Digivolution sources is removed, then we get to draw 1 card. So it's a little bit different in which the act of trashing is going to be allowing us to draw a card versus the opponent having nothing underneath them, and we have to be attacking in order to draw a card. So they do both have their pros and cons, but essentially they're both just trying to help us draw cards, which is all we want out of the Digitama slot. Next, on to the rookies, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gabumon. So this is the BT01 of Gabumon, and this is a flex spot for the deck, so it could really be anything you want it to be, but I do just value the ability to have a Digimon we could hard play to draw a card. Next up, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Bulucomon. So Bulucomon is a pretty solid card for the deck to be running because this is acting kind of like a tempo engine for the deck. It has a very similar inheritable ability to Kyaromon, where during your turn, once per turn, when we trash one of the opponent's Digivolution sources off of one of their Digimon, then we get to gain 1 memory. So this just allows us to play around with our memory for the act of trashing the opponent's Digivolution sources, which is what we're going to be doing a lot of, making Bulucomon one of the better inheritables for the deck. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of ModokiBetamon. So ModokiBetamon is another flex spot, and this slot is going to be dedicated towards like a tech or counter card. So what this card is doing is it has the very powerful All Turns ability, where your opponent can't gain memory except by tamer effects. So we're just trying to use this card to shut out their memory manipulating shenanigans and control and limit some of their actions as a result. And then the last rookie is going to be 4 copies of Gomamon. So this is the promo Gomamon, and this Gomamon is in the deck because, well, it's essentially just 4 more extra copies of Bulucomon. So that way we could try to see this ability as often as we possibly can. But if you really wanted to, you could try to vary up the abilities, and this card is another flex spot in the deck, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Gomamon. It's just still a really good ability to have, and an ability you want to see a lot of. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Lobomon. So Lobomon is a pretty decent card just because, well, hybrids win games, and hybrids are very powerful Digimon to be playing around with. So what's making this card so good is his ability where we could Digivolve him from our hand on top of one of our blue tamers, as if our blue tamer was a level 3 Digimon. And that's pretty important to use as a game finisher, so that way we could try to chip the opponent out and deal as much damage as we possibly can with our other Digimon, then Digivolve on top of one of our tamers and swing for the game. So that's the intended use on how we could use Lobomon, but he's still just a decent level 4 to use in case we don't see any of our other level 4s. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Silamon. So Silamon is a pretty decent card for this deck to be playing around with because this card is a tempo blocker. So what that exactly means is we're using this card for fulfilling 2 roles. So the first role that it's fulfilling is a tempo efficient card just because, well, it evos for 1, allowing us to digivolve into it and off of it as efficiently as we possibly can. And then on top of that, he's also fulfilling a blocker role, adding some extra defense elements to the deck because, well, we still want to have some form of defense in the deck, even though we're just trying to aggress with our level 6s. So this is a pretty good card for fulfilling both of those roles, and it has that flexibility because because being a 5000 DP blocker isn't necessarily the best anymore, just because there's lots of cards that could get through this, and there's lots of abilities that could remove this. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Ikkakumon. So this is the brand new classic version of Ikkakumon, and this Ikkakumon is a pretty decent Digimon, adding some extra control elements into the deck. So what this card's doing that's so strong and why we want him is the fact that he has this ability where during your turn, this Digimon can attack the opponent's unsuspended Digimon with no Digivolution sources. So that's a pretty rare ability to have, to be able to attack into the opponent's unsuspended Digimon, and the fact that we already can get the opponent's Digimon to have no Digivolution sources is very, very powerful. So if we want to try to remove the opponent's Digimon before they actually become threats, then Ikkakumon is a really powerful card to be attacking and swinging into those weaker mid to low level Digimon. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Grizzlymon. So Grizzlymon is going to be the alternative blocker. I just felt like compared to everything else we could be running some extra defense isn't necessarily going to be the worst thing in the world. So what Grizzlymon is doing is he's going to be acting as a more primary blocker because, well, he has more DP than Silamon, and that's just going to make him stick and stay on the field a little bit longer than Silamon, making him just the better of the two to block with, and then that opens up Silamon to be used in more flexible ways because he has the alternative evolution cost of evoing for 1, where this is a little bit more expensive evoing for 2. But the fact that we want to run multiple different blockers is just really, really good. So that way we could try to tackle the different situations in which the blockers could perform better than the other. Next, on to the ultimates, I'm going to be running 2 copies of CrysPaledramon. So CrysPaledramon is a very good Digimon for this deck to be running because, well, it just has all of that native synergy with what the deck is trying to do. So its native when Digivolving ability allows us to trash the bottom Digivolution source off of all of the opponent's Digimon, which is very, very powerful. So if they're building a wide field, then we could start trashing from all of their Digimon, so that way we can make Hexeblaumon and Azulong's ability online even faster. And then on top of that, he has a nice inheritable ability where during your turn, if your opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, which he's helping to achieve that, then this Digimon gains Security Attack +1, allowing whatever Mega we're going to be using to punch even harder than they normally would, making him just a very strong card for the deck. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Majiramon. So Majiramon is another really powerful Digimon for this deck to be running, similar to CrysPaledramon. So what this card is doing is he has 2 abilities. His native when Digivolving ability allows us to trash the top Digivolution source off of one of the opponent's Digimon, which is really powerful because there's just a lot of very strong level 5 inheritable abilities that we want to try to get rid of, and if we can't necessarily get rid of the whole stack all at once, this at least allows us to try to pick off one of, if not the most important inheritable ability, which is very, very powerful, having different ways to trash the opponent's Digivolution sources. And on top of that, what we're really trying to use the card for is his inheritable ability of when attacking once per turn. If your opponent has no Digimon with Digivolution sources in it in play, then we get to unsuspend this card. So this is just very, very powerful just because, well, this actually allows us to multi-swing with our Digimon, allowing them to deal more damage than they normally would, making him for just a very powerful card, especially if we have any when attacking abilities that don't trigger once per turn, then we could use this card in tandem with some of those abilities to gain even more benefit from. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Zudomon. So Zudomon is another brand new card that came out with the Classic Collection, and this version of Zudomon is just a very powerful control type tool to be using similar to Ikkakumon. So its when Digivolving ability allows us to trash 1 Digivolution source from the bottom of one of the opponent's Digimon, which just again allows us to try to pick off their inheritable sources in different ways. And then on top of that, the ability we're trying to actually utilize this card for is the fact that, similar to Ikkakumon, he could attack the opponent's Digimon that are unsuspended with no Digivolution sources. So we could try to, again, control the opponent's field and stop them from using their Digimon from Digivolving, while Hexeblaumon locks them down from being able to attack or defend. So this is really good and really important because this Digimon does have a little bit higher DP than some of your other level 5s, actually allowing him to delete a lot of potential level 5s and lower. Next, on to the Megas, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Hexeblaumon. So Hexeblaumon is still just the best card that we have to be playing around with to interact with the opponent's inheritable sources, and one of the most easy and powerful ways to try to get rid of them. So what this card is doing is he has a when attacking ability where we get to trash the bottom 2 Digivolution sources off of one of the opponent's Digimon. Then if your opponent has a Digimon in play with no Digivolution sources, then he'll gain the jamming ability. So this is just, again, really powerful at trying to pick off the opponent's inheritables, and he's going to be giving himself jamming, so that way when he swings onto the opponent's security, he's going to make that swing relatively safe, with the only real fear being options or security Digimon. Then what this card's secondary ability is doing is what we're really trying to gain and take advantage of for the deck is his All Turns ability, where all of your opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources can't attack or block, essentially stun locking them down, making it so that they're forced to evolve into their higher stages just to try to use their Digimon, or they're not going to be able to use their Digimon at all for much of anything. So this is just, again, a very powerful card and the center point of what the deck is trying to do. And as a really good complement to that strategy, I'm also going to be running 2 copies of Azulongmon, because Azulongmon is adding that giant punch factor that the deck was lacking before. So what this card is doing is he has a when Digivolving ability where we get to trash the bottom Digivolution source off of all of the opponent's Digimon. Then for each of the opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, then we get to gain 1 memory. So the more Digimon they have basically stun locked, the cheaper Azulongmon is going to be, which is really, really powerful because that feeds into his secondary ability where during your turn, for each of the opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, this Digimon gains a security attack +1. So this is just very powerful because, again, the wider the opponent's field with no inheritable sources underneath, the stronger this card becomes to punch the opponent's security as hard as he possibly can. Pair this up with CrysPaledramon or Majiramon means that he's going to gain even more damage potential, making him just a very powerful card for the deck to be playing around with, especially since he naturally has a DP of 13,000, so he's already stronger than your average level 6. And then the last mega of the deck is going to be the only level 7 of the deck, and that's going to be 1 copy of Omnimon. So this is the BT05 version of Omnimon, and we're using this card mainly as just an alternate win condition. So what this card is doing is he has 2 powerful when Digivolving abilities. The first one is Blitz, so this Digimon can attack even when the memory goes over onto the opponent's side, which feeds into his secondary ability of being able to unsuspend this Digimon. So the whole point is we're going to try to damage the opponent's security as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can. Then once all of their security is gone, we could just Digivolve into Omnimon and swing for the game, making him just a very powerful card to be playing around with. Then if we're unable to win the game off of this Omnimon, he has a very powerful All Turns ability that's adding some protection, so that way he could try to stay around as much as he possibly can, where when this Digimon would be deleted or returned to the hand or deck by the opponent's card effects, then you could trash 1 level 6 from his inheritable sources to prevent this Digimon from being deleted or returning to the hand or deck. So having some protection is really, really good versus having no protection at all in case we don't use him to close out the game with. Next, on to the options, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Howling Memory Boost. So Howling Memory Boost is just a memory boost that's fitting on theme with what we're trying to do, which is stunlock the opponent's Digimon and attack their inheritable sources. So its main ability allows us to trash 2 cards from the bottom of one of the opponent's Digimon, and then after that, one of the opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources can't attack or block, and then we get to place this into the battle area for its other ability of Delay to gain us 2 memory at a later turn. So when we're not fully up into Hexeblaumon or Hexeblaumon is off the field, this is a really good alternative card to try to use to stunlock the opponent's Digimon, so that way we could buy some time to try to figure out how to actually aggress and win the game. And speaking of cards that are allowing us to buy some time, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Ice Wall. Yes, I do understand as of BT07, this card is going to be limited to 1, but while we have it for Classic Collection not unlimited, we might as well run it in any quantity we feel like. And I feel like running 3 copies of Ice Wall is really, really good, just because this card's defensive capabilities is really, really powerful. So it has the main ability where all of the opponent's Digimon gain the ability where, when attacking, they have to lose 2 memory until the end of their next turn. So basically, you're taxing their Digimon from attacking, which is basically de-incentivizing them from even wanting to attack with their Digimon. So if they even are able to Digivolve up to use their Digimon after Hexeblaumon tries to stunlock them, they might not be even able to, just because Ice Wall can tax that attack and could possibly force end their turn for being such an efficient option card. And then it has the security ability of it being able to gain 2 memory, so even in the security, it's still acting as a pretty decent security threat. And then lastly, onto the tamers, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Davis. So Davis is just that memory fixing tamer, where if our memory is ever less than 3, he'll just hard set us to 3. So that way we could try to make our plays as efficiently as we possibly can, actually consistently having memory to play with. And then he has an on-play ability that's adding to the overall consistency of the deck, where we get to check the top 3 and add 1 blue and 1 green Digimon from among them into our hand, and the rest go to the bottom. So that way we could try to dig for our parts and pieces, because the majority of our deck is blue. And then the last card and last tamer of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Sora and Joe. So Sora and Joe is a very powerful card to be playing with for this deck, just because it allows us to trash the opponent's inheritables relatively quickly and rewards us with additional memory for them having no Digimon with Digivolution sources in play. So at the start of your turn, you get to gain 2 memory if the opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, which is relatively easy to get based on how we're playing this deck and all of the ways that we have to trash the opponent's inheritables, on top of the fact that this card just allows us to trash the bottom 2 Digivolution sources when one of our blue Digimon is attacking by suspending this tamer, so that way we could try to alternatively trash the opponent's inheritables to make it so that our Azulongmon and Hexeblaumon are as powerfully consistent as they possibly can be. And then there's still just a decent amount of room for flexibility based on how you want to build the deck and what you want the deck to try to be doing. So in terms of some other really good rookies that you could be playing outside of like just your generic tempo cards, we do have Ikkakumon to try to stop the opponent from reducing their Digivolution. So that way, again, similar to ModokiBetamon, it's just a tech card to try to control and manipulate some of the opponent's actions. Then if you do want some DP boosts, we do have Gazimon in the rookie slot that you could be playing around with. Yes, the unfortunate thing with Gazimon is all of the opponent's Digimon have to not have inheritable sources to get the 2000 boost, but again, that's not necessarily the hardest to set up in the deck. And if you want to run something alternatively, just to try to DP boost, you do have the starter deck Gabumon, where it's just relying on your hand being at 8 cards or more. Then we do have the brand new Gomamon and various cards like Gomamon with the on-play ability to try to trash the opponent's inheritable sources, which is never a bad thing because that's just what the deck is trying to do. And we do have various other really good on-play Digimon that we could think about utilizing depending on how you want to build your deck. And I'm just going to be highlighting the promo Gabumon just because he's looking for our tamers, and finding our tamers could be relatively important. Then on top of that, we have some pretty decent alternative champions to be running, like Ikkakumon from BT01 to try to make our Digimon unblockable when we're not in Hexeblaumon, making it so that, well, our Digimon can actually aggress. And then we have some alternative cards to try to pick apart the opponent's inheritables, like Paledramon, that just have some pretty decent synergy with what the deck is trying to do. And to round out what our level 4s could be doing, we do have Quadramon to just act as a really good security Digimon, so that way he can play himself for free and help us try to draw some cards. As far as some alternate ultimates go, I feel like the ultimates that we already are running are really strong, but if you wanted to, you could run Shakuamon as basically an alternative to Hexeblaumon in case we don't have Hexeblaumon on the field, just because giving the opponent's Digimon security attack -1 could be really, really obnoxious for them to be playing around against it, just because it effectively is doing the same thing, where it's not allowing the opponent to actually aggress onto us with any of their Digimon. And then as far as an alternative mega goes, we do have Zudomon all the way back in BT02 to think about if you just want an alternative card to try to punch with, or if you want, you could think about running the brand new Plesiomon, just because the brand new Plesiomon is doing that same type of thing, where it's adding some extra control elements into the deck while helping us draw cards. And speaking of alternative really powerful Digimons, we do have a couple of other level 7s we could be playing around with in the deck. So if you wanted to, you could use Gabumon Bond of Friendship as just an alternative card to multi-swing with on our level 7 slot, while trying to remove the opponent's Digimon all at the same time for being one of the more efficient level 7s to think about. And then we do just have a couple of different Omnimons that we could be playing. So you could be playing BT01 Omni, or you could be playing X Antibody Omni, and they're both just trying to do some very powerful things for just being really solid level 7s. Then to round out the option package even more, if you wanted to, you could run Blue Memory Boost for some extra consistency, just for being a memory boost and digging for our blue Digimon. Then you could even think about running Hammer Spark, because the tempo that Hammer Spark gives is still pretty good, with a really annoying security ability that's doing the exact same thing as our Ice Wall. And then we do just have a whole bunch of bounce effects that we could be running to try to remove the opponent's threats in case we actually want to try to remove them, rather than stun lock them and make it so that the opponent can't do anything with their Digimon. And then we do have some alternative tamers that you could possibly think about running. So if you want to run just a cheap, efficient tamer, then you could run Matt to just try to help passively gain you some additional memory. You could run Joe if you really wanted to, just again, to try to passively gain you some additional memory. And if you want a budget option to Davis, then you could run BT01 Matt as just a solid memory fixing tamer for blue. So there are just various different tamers that we have access to that are all pretty decent with what the deck is trying to do. But for the most part, the deck doesn't really change that much. You're just using a little bit of different tech and tools thanks to the new stuff that Classic Collection is adding, and the Ikkakumon line that the Classic Collection is adding is really, really nice because it actually gives us some extra control elements into the deck to try to beat up the opponent's Digimon before they could actually use them to Digivolve, which is really, really powerful because once the opponent has a level 6 or level 7 with no inheritable sources, we don't even need to worry about that at all as being a potential threat, just because Hexeblaummon's ability to lock them down will be absolute, and we need to worry about their level 5s and below, so that way we could try to clear those out before they can Digivolve them to actually use as Digimon. So the Classic Collection adds that type of control element into the deck, which is making the deck function even better than it was before. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.